some woman and at the same time watching him, ready for him. It struck him, as the gulf of water closed, how small she looked on that huge ship. His heart was wrung with such a spasm that he could have cried out. How little she looked to have come all that way and back by herself. Just like her, though. Just like Janey. She had the courage of a... And now the crew had come forward and parted the passengers. They had lowered the rails for the gangways. The voices on shore and the voices on board flew to greet each other. "All well? All well. How's mother? Much better. Hello, Jean. Hello, Aunt Emily. Had a good voyage? Splendid. Shan't be long now. Not long now." The engine stopped. Slowly she edged to the wharf side. "Make way there! Make way! Make way!" And the wharf hands brought the heavy gangways along at a sweeping run. Hammond signed to Janey to stay where she was. The old harbour master stepped forward. He followed. As to ladies first, or any rot like that, it never entered his head. "After you, Captain," he cried genially. And, treading on the old man's heels, he strode up the gangway onto the deck in a bee-line to Janey, and Janey was clasped in his arms. "Well, well, well! Yes, yes, here we are at last," he stammered. It was all he could say, and Janey emerged, and her cool little voice, the only voice in the world for him, said, "Well, darling, have you been waiting long?" No, not long, or at any rate it didn't matter. It was over now. But the point was, he had a cab waiting at the end of the wharf. Was she ready to go off? Was her luggage ready? In that case they could cut off sharp with her cabin luggage and let the rest go hang until tomorrow. He bent over her and she looked up with her familiar half smile. She was just the same. Not a day changed. Just as he'd always known her. She laid her small hand on his sleeve. "How are the children, John?" she asked. Hang the children. "Perfectly well. Never better in their lives." "Haven't they sent me letters?" "Yes, yes, of course. I've left them at the hotel for you to digest later on." "We can't go quite so fast," said she. "I've got people to say good-bye to, and then there's the captain." As his face fell she gave his arm a small understanding squeeze. "If the captain comes off the bridge I want you to thank him for having looked after your wife so beautifully." Well, he'd got her. If she wanted another 10 minutes. As he gave way she was surrounded. The whole first class seemed to want to say good-bye to Janey. "Good-bye, dear Mrs. Hammond, and next time you're in Sydney I'll expect you." "Darling Mrs. Hammond, you won't forget to write to me, will you?" "Well, Mrs. Hammond, what this boat would have been without you." It was as plain as a pikestaff that she was by far the most popular woman on board, and she took it all, just as usual, absolutely composed, just her little self, just Janey all over, standing there with her veil thrown back. Hammond never noticed what his wife had on. It was all the same to him whatever she wore. But today he did notice that she wore a black costume, didn't they call it? With white frills, trimmings he supposed they were, at the neck and sleeves. All this while Janey handed him round. "John dear," and then, "I want to introduce you to—" Finally they did escape, and she led the way to her stateroom, to follow Janey down the passage that she knew so well, that was so strange to him, to part the green curtains after her and to step into the cabin that had been hers gave him exquisite happiness. But, confound it, the stewardess was there on the floor, strapping up the rugs. "That's the last, Mrs. Hammond," said the stewardess, rising and pulling down her cuffs. He was introduced again, and then Janey and the stewardess disappeared into the passage. He heard whisperings. She was getting the tipping business over, he supposed. He sat down on the striped sofa and took his hat off. There were the rugs she had taken with her. They looked good as new. All her luggage looked fresh, perfect. The labels were written in her beautiful little clear hand, Mrs. John Hammond. Mrs. John Hammond. He gave a long sigh of content and leaned back, crossing his arms. The strain was over. He felt he could have sat there for ever sighing his relief, the relief at being rid of that horrible tug, pull, grip on his heart. The danger was over. That was the feeling. They were on dry land again. But at that moment Janey's head came round the corner. "Darling, do you mind? I just want to go and say good-bye to the doctor." Hammond started up. "I'll come with you." "No, no," she said. "Don't bother. I'd rather not. I'll not be a minute." And before he could answer she was gone. He had half a mind to run after her, but instead he sat down again. Would she really not be long? What was the time now? Out came the watch. He stared at nothing. That was rather queer of Janey, wasn't it? Why couldn't she have told the stewardess to say good-bye for her? Why did she have to go chasing after the ship's doctor? She could have sent a note from the hotel even if the affair had been urgent. Urgent? Urgent? Could it mean that she had been ill on the voyage? She was keeping something from him. That was it. He seized his hat. He was going off to find that fella and to wring the truth out of him at all costs. He thought he'd noticed just something. She was just a touch too calm, too steady, from the very first moment. The curtains rang. Janey was back. He jumped to his feet. "Janey, have you been ill on this voyage? You have." "Ill?" Her airy little voice mocked him. She stepped over the rugs and came up close, touched his breast and looked up at him. "Darling," she said, "don't frighten me. Of course I haven't. Whatever makes you think I have? Do I look ill?" But Hammond didn't see her. He only felt that she was looking at him and that there was no need to worry about anything. She was here to look after things. It was all right. Everything was. The gentle pressure of her hand was so calming that he put his over hers to hold it there, and she said, "Stand still. I want to look at you. I haven't seen you yet. You've had your beard beautifully trimmed, and you look younger, I think, and decidedly thinner. Bachelor life agrees with you." "Agrees with me?" He groaned for love and caught her close again. And again, as always, he had the feeling that he was holding something that never was quite his. Something too delicate, too precious, that would fly away once he let go. "For God's sake, let's get off to the hotel so that we can be by ourselves." And he rang the bell hard for someone to look sharp with the luggage. Walking down the wharf together she took his arm. He had her on his arm again. And the difference it made to get into the cab after Janey, to throw the red and yellow striped blanket round them both, to tell the driver to hurry because neither of them had had any tea. No more going without his tea or pouring out his own. She was back. He turned to her, squeezed her hand, and said gently, teasingly, in the special voice he had for her, "Glad to be home again, dearie?" She smiled. She didn't even bother to answer, but gently she drew his hand away as they came to the brighter streets. "We've got the best room in the hotel," he said. "I wouldn't be put off with another. And I asked the chambermaid to put in a bit of a fire in case you felt chilly. She's a nice attentive girl. And I thought now we were here we wouldn't bother to go home tomorrow, but spend the day looking around and leave the morning after. Does that suit you? There's no hurry, is there? The children will have you soon enough. I thought a day's sightseeing might make a nice break in your journey. Eh, Janey?" "Have you taken the tickets for the day after?" she asked. "I should think I have." He unbuttoned his overcoat and took out his bulging pocket-book. "Here we are. I reserved a first-class carriage to Cooktown. There it is!